response to my last video dealing with mental health issues from an anecdotal, purely non-medical professional perspective. And I even got some really nice private messages from people to the same effect, saying that the video was really comforting for them, and a couple of people shared their experiences with me, and that was really nice. So I think it makes sense to kind of continue this sort of a subgenre of ASMR, I guess you could say, that deals with motivation and substantive help for people that suffer from these all too unfortunately common issues of depression and anxiety, depersonalization, derealization, OCD, etc. They're all sort of roughly, if not on the same spectrum, then very much related to one another. They very often happen. They often occur comorbidly with one another, so it helps to kind of address them all at the same time while respecting the differences between each condition. But again, since I'm not a medical professional, I'm speaking purely from anecdote, so please don't take this as professional medical advice, because it's anything but. I always warn people that if they feel they have an issue, make sure that they get a wide swath of advice from their general physicians or any specialists that they might be referred to, as well as talking to other people who have experienced what they're experiencing. So, with that being said, I wanted to get into kind of the entry point topic for tonight. And that is, it's sort of abstract, but it's the feeling of being dead inside. And I know that a million different things, but if you saw my last video, I'm pretty, you know that I'm pretty into the idea of neuroplasticity. That is the idea that you can rewire your own brain by behaviorally modifying yourself through your life. And it's hard work, but it's completely doable, and you can improve your situation quite a bit, if not entirely, by changing your behaviors and your thought patterns. So, what do I mean by feeling dead inside, specifically? Well, again, like I said, it's related to brain chemistry, neuroplasticity, and the way that kind of stuff is reflected in your day-to-day life. It's about questioning the assumptions that you make every moment that have led you, at least in part, to the unfortunate place that you're in now. And this is me speaking from experience. Nowadays, I'm a very different person than I was 4 years ago, when I experienced a very intense nervous breakdown, which was followed by intense episodes of derealization, as well as some light depersonalization, and a whole host of anxiety and depression issues that we'll get into in a little bit. But the main topic here, of course, is feeling dead, feeling you lack that creative spark that you perceive other people to have, or perhaps you just don't find that you're getting any kind of natural human joy out of basic everyday occurrences that should at least maybe put a smile on your face. I'm here to tell you that you're not alone, and that there are a lot of people who suffer as you do, even though that might seem incredibly unlikely right now, because it may be that you've just started to experience some of these things in a very intense way, and it can be a little scary. So that's pretty much your mind playing tricks on you, though, at the end of the day, because it's such an intense and new experience. You are naturally going to afford it more intensity than it deserves. And the unfortunate result of that is that people often make their symptoms much worse simply by obsessing about them. I know for a fact that that's what I did, and I even still do once in a while nowadays. So, getting back to kind of the main topic here. You've been feeling like you've lost kind of that feeling of basic humanity. You sort of feel like a husk, going about each task day to day without feeling any kind of simple joy out of basic things in life. Oftentimes, I've found, at least through my personal experience, the problem lied within me and the fact that I had been in denial for a long time about perhaps not exploring creative opportunities as much as I should have, as well as just not changing unhealthy things that were going on in my life that maybe I felt stuck with for whatever reason, whether it might be a toxic family member or judgmental friends or perhaps a schooling situation that you're not entirely comfortable with. For instance, you might have committed yourself financially to a rather intense education, and you've discovered too late that the trade or profession that you've chosen to study is not really the path that you want to take in life. I've noticed that a lot of people who get into that situation often then develop some very intense anxiety and panic issues. Derealization, that's one of the big triggers that I read about a lot. So, if you've experienced that, again, know that you're not alone. So, what is the single biggest problem then that contributes to these conditions and ultimately that feeling of being dead inside? Well, I just said it. It's being alone, or at least feeling like you're alone. You have to understand that your perceptions of the world around you versus the reality can get extremely skewed when you suffer from these mental conditions, psychological conditions, especially depression and derealization, and the others to a lesser extent. But when you reach that level of paranoia that derealization and depression can embody in people, it's very easy to start believing a lot of wrong things about your surrounding environment and the people that you interact with. The problem really lies with having created neural pathways in your brain that, in a sense, have created a short circuit so that anytime you encounter a situation in life, no matter how small or big, you're always going to take what they call the path of least resistance. That phrase doesn't just come from nowhere. It's really in reference to the way electricity flows, which is exactly what's happening in your brain. Your tendency to do one thing or the other, or think one thing or the other, given any particular situation, is determined by the neural pathways in your brain that have become hardened over time. And when a certain pathway from point A to point B gets used over and over and over again, your brain will tend to default to that pathway in the future, given the same situation. So you can see that there's a rather obvious and continuous feedback loop that happens when you make a habit of reacting in a certain way to a situation. And after a while, the other potential pathways start to become kind of deadened and eventually break altogether. But don't let that worry you. They can be rebuilt. The brain is plastic. After all, you've not permanently damaged yourself, but you do need to do some behavioral modification to get yourself out of the rut that you've gotten stuck in. So, again, going back to the electricity analogy, the path of least resistance for a neuron to fire is down a pathway that's been used over and over and over again. So, it's negative side of every situation, because those are the neural pathways that have been basically hardened and solidified over time through overuse, so that they become very hard to break, very hard to do anything other than see everything as a negative. So the way that you can change that is by doing very hard work. And what I mean by that is constantly questioning your assumption about any situation rather than simply allowing yourself to go with the default response. For instance, if you feel that, to use a specific example, if you feel that a friend has been dishonest with you as a depressed person, or perhaps someone who suffers from an abnormal level of paranoia, and usually the two go hand in hand, you'll usually default to assuming the worst, that that person is out to harm you in some way, or at the very least has no regard for your well-being, even though you've been friends for a while. In order to get through that sort of thinking and to change your habits, you need to constantly question the outcome of all the potential situations. So, for instance, for me, if I ever had an issue with, say, that level of paranoia in the past, I would simply question the worst case scenario, that that person was being dishonest with me for whatever reason. And a strange thing happened when I began to question that enough times. I realized that my fear and paranoia in situations like that stemmed from my own lack of belief in myself, as cheesy as that might sound. I had no confidence in my own abilities to exist outside of a particular group of friends, for instance. So, whenever that group of friends, and whenever I got into a situation with those friends where I had to question the honesty of one or several of them, that was essentially a way to compromise my entire support structure, because my whole identity was wrapped up in just that group of people. And I've noticed this happens with a lot of people. It's not just me. I've gotten a lot better with this stuff, and it wasn't through medication. It was through doing that hard work every day of questioning. First, why would this person be dishonest with me? What would they have to gain from it? But more importantly, why would it matter at the end of the day? If this is a fundamentally dishonest person, do I need them in my life? And if you have self-confidence and the belief that you can exist without that person in a happy way, then you would ultimately conclude, who cares? You'll just move on with your life one way or the other. But if you don't have anything going on in your own life outside of that group of friends, then of course you're going to feel completely compromised when you get into that situation. So that's what I mean by questioning every assumption that you make, and then also taking a look at the worst case scenario. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to realize that the worst case scenario isn't anywhere near as bad as you've given it the power to be. Now, on the other side of the coin, you need to work on yourself and your passion outside of anything that relies on other people. And again, this goes back to that feeling of being dead inside. This is another bit of hard work that a lot of people are very resistant to going through, but it can be extremely cathartic and very productive. You've heard the phrase going through the motions. It's usually meant as in a pejorative way, as if it's a bad thing to only go through the motions. And usually that's true, but for us, for people who suffer from depression, anxiety, derealization, etc., sometimes the best possible thing is to go through the motions, because because our only other alternative at this point in time is not to do anything, which is the worst possible option I can think of. The nice thing about forcing yourself to go through the motions is that you are reinforcing positive neural pathways in your brain that over time will start to harden with repeated use, just like all of those negative pathways that you've reinforced over maybe your entire life. You'd be very surprised at how quickly you can break those habits, even if they've been lifelong. But it does require work over an extended period of time. You'll see results slowly but surely. Another great side effect of doing this kind of experiment, besides it being far more productive than sitting around and doing nothing and getting worse, is that simply by increasing the numbers of activities that you're engaging in, whether it's trying to pick up a new hobby, meet some new friends, go to a new place, even if it's somewhere close to your hometown, once in a while, you're going to accidentally find something that you actually kind of like, and it will organically allow you to start growing some new interests and new passions. What you've essentially done is tricked yourself into developing a sense of self-worth by going out there on your own and getting interested in things simply by forcing yourself to put one foot in front of the other. This is where most people who are chronically depressed get badly tripped up because they don't want to put in the work. They're extremely tired from the level of emotional intensity that they experience on a daily basis. And that goes doubly for people with anxiety who might be kept up at night feeling like they're literally going to die with either anxiety attacks or even worse, panic attacks. All that cortisol running through your body and brain are doing you no favors when it comes to getting outside and doing something. Believe me when I say that I know it seems like an almost insurmountable task, an unclimbable mountain, to actually get out there and do something even in your hometown. For a lot of us, it's hard to even leave the house. I remember a period of my life where I experienced such intense social anxiety that I didn't leave for weeks at a time. And that was one of the most unhealthy periods of my life, precisely because I wasn't changing anything. I was living completely in fear of the effects of derealization that were very new to me at the time. And ultimately, I didn't have anybody to talk to. I didn't even really understand the nature of the condition or what the symptoms were like, so I was just living in pure fear. Add on to that a fear of the medical community and basically anxiety about doctors, and I was completely shut down. I felt like I had nowhere to turn. Thankfully at the time, and still now, I have a very supportive wife who saw me through a lot of those hard times, despite many of my friends and extended family not really understanding what I was going through and often choosing simply to ignore the issue. So you definitely have an ally in me. I get where you're coming from, and I bet a lot of you maybe have experienced that at times where it seems like it's hard enough to summon the courage to tell people that are close to you what's going on. But it's even worse when people like that respond with basically alienation, and they either stop talking to you or they simply choose not to address the issue because it's too abstract for them. That's not to say that they're entirely blameworthy, but that goes to reinforce the importance of having people that you can talk to, and I hope that these videos are at least in some way, even though we're not sitting face to face having a two-way conversation right now, that hopefully this is in some way kind of a way to express yourself by understanding that other people similar things to what you might be experiencing now. So, I know this has been a little bit rambly, but I also hope that you can see kind of the connection between that feeling of being dead inside and other things that you might be experiencing right now, like depression, anxiety, dissociative effects, etc. These conditions usually cause people to hole up in their own little worlds. It's what it did to me, and still does, although thankfully to a much lesser extent. Now that I've done a lot of that hard groundwork myself, by getting out there and learning new things, and developing new passions, and overall just being more self-reliant. And you're not going to be able to move mountains all at once. And this is another place where people get tripped up. They think that if they can't go out and do it all right now, that they'll never be able to do anything. And so they just stop trying. You're always going to fail with that mindset 100% of the time. So you might as well give that up. A far more productive mindset is one of incremental goal setting. That is, choose a small thing that's manageable for a small unit of time in which to accomplish that task. For instance, if you have a social anxiety issue, maybe a good small goal for you is to go to a store or go to a coffee shop, strike up a conversation with somebody, or perhaps if you have depression issues or isolation issues or derealization, you might have bad problems with being in large public places, or you might have problems of going on road trips or something like that. So set a small goal of, say, getting out of town for half of a day to go somewhere that you haven't been before. Or perhaps you can set goals even around your house, accomplishing things in your immediate environment, such as cleaning and decorating, that sort of thing, improving your immediate surroundings so that your visual environment is reflective of your ideal mental environment. That's a pretty big deal, and a lot of people don't understand that too much clutter and dirt around them and their immediate environment is a major trigger for anxiety and all that other bad stuff. So let's go back over some of this. We know that there are neural pathways that correspond with different reactions and habits to sensory input that we experience in life. Generally speaking, this is not always true, but generally speaking, and I know this is true for me, depression and the host of other related mental disorders often stem from too many of those negative neural pathways being dominant in the mind, creating a very negative outlook on the world and life. Oftentimes, those neural pathways in people who suffer from mental disorders, or psychological disorders, I should say, the commonality between most of us is that we have tons of neural pathways that are reinforcing negative thoughts and behaviors, and very few pathways reinforcing constructive things like getting out there and creating new things, kind of flexing our creative muscles and kind of building lives. So of course people like us tend to stagnate pretty badly, and that's unfortunate, but it's not a foregone conclusion. If you force yourself to take small steps every day towards an ideal life, I guess you could say, or at least a better life than the one that you know you're leading right now, you have to set those small goals. Only then will you be able to start pulling yourself out of this pit that you've kind of fallen things in your brain is that, just like the negative ones, positive behaviors and positive reinforcement are also feedback loops in the brain. Every time you choose explicitly to refuse to take the negative path through a particular situation and instead change your behavior and reaction, the conditioned response to that particular bit of input, to something that's positive and constructive, it will become just a little bit easier next time. Sometimes you'll achieve on such a small level that you won't be able to notice that, but I guarantee you if you stick with it and keep on doing it just through sheer statistical probability, you will find, again, like I said, accidentally, you'll find things that you're actually passionate about or interesting people, but it does require you to leave. There's that phrase that things happen when you get off the couch. It's very true. I didn't really buy into it until I finally realized that by going out there and taking charge of my own creativity and well-being, by forcing myself to be in the world, regardless of how uncomfortable it was, it got a little bit easier all the time. So, that's my message to you for tonight is, you're not going crazy, you're not going to die, you're not unfixable, and if you feel dead inside, if you feel like you're lacking some vital spark, it's not the end of the world, not by a long shot, and more people, unfortunately, are starting to experience this, so you're far from alone, even though you might feel like you are. It's purely your mind playing tricks on you through chemical imbalances. But these are things that can be righted through a whole bunch of different techniques, some of which I've talked about tonight. But again, make sure to do your due diligence and speak with medical professionals, both in terms of your general physician as well as perhaps a licensed therapist. But at the same time, I want you to be very wary of simply turning to medications as the answer to everything, because they're not always the answer. For some people, they're so badly chemically imbalanced that they need those medications in order to pull themselves out of the hole a little bit, so that they can then start to take those self-affirming steps that I've been talking about. But tons of people that have decided to get on medication right away probably would have been better served in the long term by doing some of that hard work themselves, as long as they have a good support network of friends or family or both. But at the end of the day, you need to take charge of your own happiness, and it's never a problem of time or resources. Those are excuses. You'll make the time if you value your mental health to get out there and to do hard work and to feel that catharsis. So even when you get home after doing something like that and you feel completely exhausted and like the anxiety or derealization or depression are taking over, you can at least rest easy knowing that you did explicit work towards becoming better by going out and exploring the world around you and forcing yourself to take those steps in the right direction of breaking yourself out of that rut and beginning to feel like you're alive again. I hope this has been helpful for you, or at least, comforting. It's, these videos are primarily meant to be motivational from the standpoint of actual science, even with my limited understanding of it. But that's the nice thing about science. It's independently verifiable and falsifiable. So my recommendation is to don't take my word for it. Go out and do your own research on neuroplasticity and how the brain works from an electrical and chemical perspective, that hard work. It's not always just medication. So I hope this was helpful, and if you have any feedback about the video, I know it was very rambly, very all over the place. They're probably always going to be like that, but any constructive feedback or comments or whatever, you know where to leave them, and I appreciate you watching. Have a great night.